All right, it's been a minute. Let's do this thing. So welcome everybody. I think we might have a few more joining us as we go, but I want to introduce myself. I'm Jenny Collis. I'm the communications coordinator for UMBS, and I want to welcome you to our science communication and advocacy panel. First, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement. As stewards of this beautiful and important place here at UMBS, we want to acknowledge its original inhabitants. The state of Michigan, named for Mishigaming, the Anishinaabe word for the interconnected water systems we now call the Great Lakes, was inhabited and stewarded by Anishinaabe peoples for centuries before statehood and the establishment of the University of Michigan. The Mishigaming lands have been interconnected to water and living systems by Anishinaabe peoples for centuries. These people of the three fires, Ojibwa, Odawa, and Potawatomi, along with their neighbors, the Menominee, Seneca, Delaware, Shawnee, and Wyandot nations, continue to steward the lands and waters we now occupy and study. So before we get started, I would like to quickly introduce our panelists. We've got Eva Roos, a recent U of M C's master's graduate in landscape architecture and conservation ecology. She's a former Great Lakes Arts, Cultures, Environments teaching assistant and UMBS Birds class alum. She's continuing to work with the Burt Lake Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians with a landscape design installation at their headquarters. We also have Hanna DeHetre. She's a current master's student at the U of M School for Environment and Sustainability. She's studying conservation ecology. She is a former UMBS student who's also been the virtual general ecology TA twice. Hanna really loves trees, and she has two cats who you may be lucky enough to see in the background or walking across the keyboard. We've also got Laura Hickey here with us. Laura is currently a grad student and researcher at Virginia Commonwealth University and UMBS, and she's formerly a UMBS REU student and field tech. Her research is focused around how canopy structure can help predict and explain forest carbon cycling processes. We also have Lisa Haber. Lisa is a graduate student also at Virginia Commonwealth University, and she's studying how forests and wetlands respond to ecological disturbance, and in particular, how plants sustain carbon storage in these ecosystems following disturbance. She's also a mom, a former high school teacher, and a gardening and outdoors enthusiast. We are lucky enough to have Kayla Mathes moderating tonight's discussion. And Kayla is a PhD student at Virginia Commonwealth University, and she's currently conducting research at UMBS that focuses on soil carbon cycling stability following forest disturbance. So you can see common threads here. All of us have strong UMBS connections. And with that, I'm gonna mute my video and audio and hand it over to Kayla, who's gonna moderate tonight's panel. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jenny, so much for that introduction. It's been such a privilege to work with Jenny on designing this panel, and I just wanted to thank all of our panelists up front for agreeing to participate tonight. So as Jenny mentioned, I am a PhD student at Virginia Commonwealth University. My ties to UMBS are multifaceted. I started as a student in undergrad, then was a TA for the forest ecosystems, and then just loved it so much that I had to come back and do my PhD research. So we're gonna go ahead and get started with the panel. I just wanted to let you know kind of the format. We're gonna do a moderated Q&A between myself, the moderator, and our four panelists. And then at the very end, if we have time, please feel free to use the Q&A chat function to put your own questions in, and we'll get to them if we have time. You've already seen that you can use the chat function for other discussion or questions along the way. So please feel free to use that as you see fit. Before we get started, I just kind of wanted to set an intention for this meeting. First of all, this is one that's not like the others in terms of our summer lecture series. This is not a lecture, it is a discussion centered around the perspectives, thoughts, ideas, and experiences about science communication and advocacy from some of our early career and younger members of our research community here at UMBS. I believe that these perspectives are super vital to this cause. You know, we are all part of a field station, a part of a science community, and it is all of us that must make the decisions about how we do our science, the values that we hold ourselves to while doing that science, and how we share and communicate that science, which is what we're going to focus on today. And all of those decisions must be made by the people actively doing that science and not the previous generation of scientists. So in my experience, I've been surrounded by incredibly talented peers, people who are science students, early career scientists, and I've heard some amazing, honest, fresh, and innovative ideas, oftentimes like in passing, about how to be a better scientist in today's society. And I just think that these perspectives are oftentimes overlooked or go unheard. So this panel is really a chance to remedy that by giving the floor to these amazing panelists to share their own personal experiences with science communication and perspectives for the future of science communication here at UMBS specifically. But with all that said, this only is an hour-long panel. We're not going to solve everything, but hopefully this is a discussion that will serve as kind of a catalyst for direct action. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first section of questions is really just getting to know our amazing panelists and their connection specifically to science communication. So my first question for you all is, why is science communication and advocacy important to your research specifically? And who are the most important audiences and stakeholders outside of academia to reach when sharing your science? So I'm going to start this question with Eva. So take us away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eva. Thank you, Kayla, and thanks, Jenny, for having me. So why science communication and advocacy is important to my research specifically. So I'm coming from a background of landscape architecture and conservation ecology. And as Jenny mentioned, I'm continuing work installing a landscape design with the Burt Lake Band, who are located very close to the biostation. And after a 1.5 year long design process, we're actually making that garden come to life in the ground together. And so what's been a really important tool is kind of communicating my own background, my own training in science, which is from the University of Michigan. It's very traditionally Western science. It's kind of a really rare opportunity to have the chance to learn ecological knowledge through other lenses, such as an Anishinaabeg lens. So I had to use science communication a lot through this work with the Burt Lake Band in trying to honestly like decolonize my own training. And as a landscape architect in training, we often use visual tools and graphics in order to communicate a design before it's implemented. And also just crafting an entire story of how a landscape design suits the people you're working with and you're learning from. And so for me, in the past 1.5 years, science communication has really been on my mind a lot, as far as just doing that act of translation, from taking the ecological knowledge I have and putting it into an Indigenous context, Indigenous worldview, and doing that primarily through the telling of a story, through presenting, but also through being really thoughtful about how graphically to communicate planting designs, ecological decisions within landscape design.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Eva. That was a really great perspective. All right, let's hear from Laura next.
Hi, thanks, Kayla. So the question. Science communication and advocacy is important to me personally because I had the privilege to be raised by 2 deaf parents. So I'm fluent and always speaking American Sign Language with them. And that kind of gave me a perspective on life that is always in this translational interpretation of contextualizing and synthesizing ideas, my own ideas as I communicate them through sign language with my parents, but even interpreting between them as deaf people to the hearing world. And with my passion for science, I think that all kind of just comes together in science communication and advocacy. So in my research, I would love to, I'm really working on like forest ecology and carbon cycling, and that could be really important to stakeholders like land managers, be that private landowners or public landowners, and really informing kind of how to, you know, properly use land, but also acknowledging all the stakeholders involved, I think is really important, beyond just us as scientists or the public landowners, but also, or the private landowners, kind of just like all interested parties. I would really think that science communication and advocacy, I am interested in kind of just being that point person that can interpret between all these different interested stakeholders and things like that.
Great, yeah, thank you for that. Let's move on to Hanna. Same question.
Hi, I'm Hanna. Thank you, Kayla. So my project for my master's program is I am developing an outdoor summer camp for kids through the School for Environment and Sustainability. So it's, for me, communication equals education. So my focus is trying to educate these students on what you would get from a normal outdoor summer camp for kids, learning how to build a fire, learning how to ID plants, but also the interdisciplinary aspect of it, the traditional ecological knowledge, the environmental justice issues, social justice, public health, incorporating that into this outdoor summer camp curriculum. So that's where science communication is really vital to my work, is learning how to just add that to a lesson plan, basically how to make that environmental education. How do we teach the students? It's tough, but yeah, it's a lot of work. It's really cool though. But yeah, that's me.
Great, awesome. Yeah, that's really important work, Hanna. All right, and Lisa, finally the same question.
Thanks. Yeah. So like Hanna, I have a background in teaching. I was a high school science teacher for 6 years before going to grad school and learning more about science myself. So yeah, I tend to frame communication generally, but definitely science communication as a former science teacher around this sort of check, like, did you understand what I said? Did I say this in a way that was digestible for you? And checking, right? Like, so I think I got this message across, but let me make sure. So I think a couple of things that I learned as a teacher continue to apply for me as a graduate student, as a scientist in training, and just as a person who cares about science and science advocacy. And the first is to try to dispense with jargon and make very few assumptions about what sorts of vocabulary or prior knowledge people, even, you know, adjacent to your discipline, but not in your immediate wheelhouse, may need more contextualization and plain language than you think. And it's good to approach science communication that way, in a way that's more generally accessible for people. Think like 8th grade vocabulary. That's, you know, kind of where we want to be. The second thing is about, and I guess this is more speaking to the advocacy piece, but I remember learning as a teacher, we had this saying in the education community that the students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And what we meant by that was that students and people generally tend to learn better when they feel an authentic connection with someone communicating with them, when they feel that their teacher has an investment in them and a genuine positive regard for them as a person. But I think that can also be taken in a slightly different way, which is, people may not care what you're studying until they know how much you care about it and why you're doing it, right? So I think that conveying excitement that you feel about your research, conveying the importance that you feel is attached to the work you're doing is really important. And that's something that I think maybe we could use some work on as scientists, is sort of expressing enthusiasm or passion for what we do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa, and for all of those answers. I feel like you guys really bring a personal touch to that answer and explaining all the elements of your own lives that makes your science important and that communication important, which is like really, really awesome. And a lot of diverse experiences too. So the second question is still kind of addressing your own personal connection to science communication. And I'm actually going to give you two different options that you can answer this question with. And the first option is to share a science communication success story. And that could be a time when you either felt like you reached a new audience, you cultivated a new relationship or interest in science, you gave or received a new perspective on a science issue, or even like a casual conversation that was somehow impactful. So that's your first option. You can share a success story, or you can share a science communication desire. So this is a personal science communication or advocacy goal of yours, and that could be in or outside of UMBS. So you get to choose which one that you want to share with us. And we're going to start with Laura this time.
Thanks, Kayla. I think I'm going to go with a science communication success story that I had. So I'm part of what's called the Graduate Organization of Biology Students at VCU. And this past semester, we were able to get in contact with a local public high school science teacher and set up a panel to kind of meet with around 35 high school students. And this panel was really just kind of, it was made up of other grad students in the program at VCU in the biology department. And the main goal of it was basically just to begin a conversation about what science actually is, remove the whole talking heads feeling or like mystery or sterility around science and like what that means. Because this high school teacher that worked with us, he very much expressed that his students really had that stereotype of like white lab coat, like very isolated job, not working in community and not really working, kind of just that whole isolated bubble of a scientist. And so we really wanted to challenge that. So we brought in grad students to each share their research on, kind of like Lisa was saying, on a very simplistic level, making sure that the science was getting through to them, but also the humanity behind each person, each grad student, and the science community was there. And we received feedback that that is exactly what it did for the high school students. This was a Zoom event too, which, getting into tools and resources for future events, I think that there is Zoom fatigue, but Zoom also has kind of opened up, you know, new pathways for all of us to be communicating science to larger audiences. So it felt like a really good culmination of, you know, working on science communication for the future, you know, hopefully engaging young students to be more interested in science, working on science communication with my peers. So we all had to learn how to simplify our work. And then, yeah, really just like kind of breaking stigmas and things like that. I feel like that was a really energizing experience. And it really has kind of set up what kind of the second part of the thing that you can answer, my science communication desires, of really being able to empower others to share science for a common goal, whether that be to a politician or whether that be to a group of high school students who need some inspiration about scientists.
Yeah, awesome. And I was hoping that some people would somehow answer both of those questions, so I appreciate that. But yeah, it's really, really awesome work. Okay, Hannah, same question.
All right. I am also going to go with a success story. So, as Jenny told you in my bio, I love trees. And I, as you could see in the chat from Annalise, hi Annalise, I was the Woody Plants GSI graduate student instructor last fall, and I will be again. So I just love trees. I really love teaching about trees and tree identification and forest ecology and all that. So I made a TikTok just for fun, really, where I just make videos teaching about trees. I think my first 2 videos were about urban trees and about the emerald ash borer, just really basic. And they like kind of blew up. I'm not but so many people watched it and so many people commented, and people would comment asking questions. People would comment sharing their experiences. It really felt like I reached a new audience, which was so cool. Like this audience of non-scientists, maybe even non-students. But I mean, it is TikTok, so most people on the platform are young. So it really felt great. And that was just really fun. And so I've been doing that a lot. Yeah, so that just felt like a really great way to reach out to young people. Like you were talking about, Laura, on different tools and stuff. TikTok, like utilizing these social media, these resources that young people use, is really cool.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome, Hannah. I feel like if I had looked at that as like a teenager, I would have loved trees a lot earlier in my life. So that gives me hope. Okay, awesome. So yeah, we're gonna move on. Lisa, a success story or a desire?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll go with I'll go with the desire. I think I would really like to get to a place where I've perfected, I'll call it my elevator pitch for lack of a better word or term, but you know, my ability to succinctly, without losing my audience, right, tell someone in under a minute, maybe even under 30 seconds, what I do, why I'm doing it, what I've found so far, why it's important. And I remember, like, I think this is weaving in a little bit of a success story, but when I started graduate school, trying to explain to some people in my extended family or friends who are not at all in science what I was doing, you know, it was hard enough for me to explain it to myself. So clearly, like, the communication with people who were not thinking about this 24/7 was pretty horrendous. But I think in the last, as time has gone on, I've gotten better at explaining to people I care about who don't necessarily do what I do, what I'm doing and why. And that feels like a success, to just feel more confident and capable of communicating in brief what I'm doing with my life. So yeah, but I'd like to get better at it. And I think as you know, hopefully I advance into a scientific career, being able to explain new and different projects over time in that way is going to be really important.
Yeah, awesome, Lisa. I actually just have a quick like follow-up like question, maybe discussion. Is the elevator pitch is something that, you know, you think about really early on in grad school. Like, yeah, how do I, you know, you're walking even in like an academic context, like you're walking down the hall and or of a conference and you see someone, you're like, oh, what are you up to these days? Like, what's your research about? And so my question is like, do you think that that elevator pitch needs to be different if it's you're talking to like another scientist or like another person studying forest carbon cycling, or like your grandma? Like, does it need to be different, or can we still use like kind of plain language summaries if you're just really trying to just get their attention? I would just wanted to know your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what other people think. I feel like if you can explain it really well to your grandma, other scientists may want to start there and then build from there. You know, I find that I very quickly get out of my depth talking to people who do things that are science, but not the kind of science I do. And I'm always really impressed and appreciative in presentations that I get to see at conferences when people break it down, explain what these axes are, you know, provide some illustrations or some photographs or some things that can, you know, where are you in the world? Kind of giving that visual and again, like plain language context, I think is always a good place to start. And yeah, you can always build more detail onto that, right? But if you've got that kind of down to an art, I think that's good. I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, I think about that a lot. Like, yeah, if you can explain it to your grandma, like you're doing pretty well. Okay, Yeah, so let's get to Eva, going back to either your success story or a science communication desire.
Okay, so I have a purring cat on my lap, so you may hear a low sound, a low rumble. But okay, so I was gonna go with the success story as well. And thinking back to working with the Burt Lake Band on this landscape design. So in landscape architecture, when you're creating designs that have planting plans, in order to share with people why you made plant choices or design choices that you did, and it specifically has to do with plants, we often have what you call plant profiles, or also a grid that might show the ecological traits of plants and how they fit the site, especially with more naturalistic planting design. But the grid part is important because yeah, that's traditional, like kind of having photos of plants and then like an Excel table of like light requirements, soil requirements, height, things like that. And for a long time, I was really, something didn't feel right about doing that for presenting about this design for the Burt Lake Band. And then it kind of stumped me for months, and I couldn't think, like, that just doesn't seem right. I don't know how to communicate this, but I'm not sure why it doesn't seem right. And then I realized that the grid itself, which we so often use in science and just in Western culture, is like a Western tool that instead, like, just take a step back from comfort of normal shapes, like actually a circle, if you're thinking in not most, like an Anishinaabe lens, like a circle is a really important shape that is a repeating symbology when you're talking about lessons about the world, lessons about life. And also just having this kind of dry labeling of a requirements that a plant has. Also, I realized that is not really how an Anishinaabe person or someone using an Anishinaabe lens would go about introducing these plants, because through that worldview, plants are so much more relatives. They're not things. They're someone who you ask, like, who is that? And if you're thinking about them as like a who, then you're also thinking about not really like specific bullets or labels about these plants, but you're thinking, how do they relate to one another? And especially in a planting plan, you are thinking of the plant community and how these plants you chose relate to one another and how they work with that site. And so through that, I decided to make a graphic that introduced these plants through a relationship web, which, it's probably confusing if I try to explain this, but if you imagine like these profiles of plants or photos of plants were in a circle, and on inner rings within this circle of photos of plants where they're also named, there's also inner rings that describe times of year of when a plant gives its gifts. And a gift might be a flower or a fruit or a medicine or a particularly like brightly aesthetic moment. And then in an additional ring, there's a description of the roles that a plant might have. So maybe that role is that it protects the ground, or another role is that it supports others aesthetically, or another role is that it stands up really tall. And through these three rungs, I ended up switching from this grid mindset to then creating a web of lines of how each plant related to these roles and the time that it gives gifts. And you end up just seeing like a cloud of connections, really. And when you think of, if we were to go back into like Western science talk, you'd be like, oh, there's a lot of ecological redundancy. Like there's a lot of support here. Like no one's doing all the work on their own, or no one's like no one plant is giving gifts in one season, and no one plant has this own singular role or responsibility. And so that for me was like a big aha, like, oh, oh, graphically, this is how, well, not just graphically, this is how I'd want to communicate this if I am trying to like kind of decolonize this training that I have. But also since coming upon that as like kind of a solution, it's actually shaped a lot about how it helps me to talk about plants in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome perspective. It's really amazing that you figured out how to take it to the next level, how to like build that bridge as opposed to just throwing out some sort of translational tool that may not relate as well. So that's a really great story. Okay, awesome, you guys. So we're gonna move on to our second section, really getting into the meat of it. And we're gonna talk about building the future of science communication as a research community at UMBS. So my first question for you all in this section is, given the vast diversity of research goals, teams, and people in this research community, who do you think are the most crucial audiences to reach when communicating science that comes out of UMBS specifically? So, and yeah, be as specific as you want, specific groups, peoples, neighborhoods, organizations, anything that comes to mind. So I'm going to start this question with Hanna.
Okay, so yeah, my first group of people that I would say is students. That's UMBS students, U of M students, other college students anywhere else, high school students. This really goes back to what Laura was saying earlier, that about showing the students what science and what research is being done and what they can do in the future, because they're the future. And I just feel like communicating to them what's being done, what it means, the implications that our science, our research has on them and their future and what they can do in the field is crucial to just continuing continuing with future generations, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then the second group of people, which is a little bit more in the here and now, would be community members. That's Pellston, residents of Pellston, residents of Michigan, just surrounding community members. Communicating what's going on at UMBS is really important because not a lot of people know exactly what we do up there. So just showing them what we do will not only help them feel more connected with us, and it's really important that we have a connection with the community. I mean, we've been up there for over 100 years now, so it's important that we have a connection to the community, but it's also important to communicate our science with them so that they can understand what climate change means. What does the future of forests look like? They're the ones who vote for policymakers. They're the ones who can help with community. They can involve themselves in community, like environmental restoration efforts or something. They're the ones that can change daily habits to help combat climate change. So yeah, those are the two groups of people that I feel is the most important to reach out to.
Yeah, awesome. And I think that's like community members too. It's like, you know, the research that we do at the station impacts their lives potentially. Like, let's say they fish in the lake and or in a river, and we have data on how that river is changing over time. Like that could be really meaningful to them. So yeah, that's really really insightful. Great. So I'm going to take it over to Lisa. Same question.
So I just want to echo everything Hanna said. I completely agree. Those are the two groups that came to my mind as well. Students, for lots of reasons, being sort of the future, but also having a more malleable set of perceptions and ideas and goals, I think is really important. Community members, right? I think if you can explain to someone in the Sheboygan Walmart what you're doing over here a few miles away, that's a really cool goal to set for yourself, and also like would be very impressive, right? To be able to have a conversation casually like that with the community member and maybe give them a new perspective on what's going on here, and, you know, challenge yourself to explain what you're doing. In order not to just echo Hanna, though, I think one thing we as a research community could maybe focus on or set an intention for. So I love on the first floor of Lakeside Lab going by the big Rolodex kind of thing with all the new publications, right? I always stop to look like, oh, what's happened in the last year since I've been here? Such great research coming out of this place all the time. The stack of papers just keeps getting bigger, right? But I think as researchers, we can challenge ourselves to publish in open access journals, you know, more and more, to publish our data sets in places where they're open source and accessible more broadly to the scientific community, but to anybody who may want to access them, and to push ourselves to publish things like plain language summaries along with our papers, so that, again, they're more accessible to a general audience. So that would be something that we as a scientific community here could invest our time in, you know, trying to be as open access and sort of, yeah, freely accessible science as we can be.
Yeah, no, that's a really great insight. And I think that even pre-publishing in an open access journal, making a plain language summary that's like maybe specific towards like the location, the place, like this research I do here. And like those, I don't know, maybe we can even publish those plain language summaries as like kind of a story, a research story type thing. That, yeah, really great. Awesome. Right, Laura, you want to take it away?
Sure. So my first like reaction to this question is almost saying like, who does our science belong to? And I know this isn't true for all research, but a lot of research is funded by the National Science Foundation. And that is going back to the taxpayers. And so I kind of always try to keep the mindset of like, who am I doing this for? Who do I want to share this with? And it's honestly the general public. That's like a huge community. That's a big ask, but it's not like, I don't even think of my data sometimes as my data. I think of it as public data. It should be shareable. It should be open. But when it comes to UMBS specifically, I feel like there is a good opportunity to share with, direct communities, Pellston, maybe even branching out into Sheboygan and Petoskey and just these northern Michigan areas that, I mean, the University of Michigan is downstate, but this is like a cool connection to the northern part of the state where you can still be sharing science and sharing information. And I think the curiosity is there. We have people, you know, on Douglas Lake just boating by, kind of peeking in. And in my experience, kind of engaging with people, even if I'm out in the field, sometimes I encounter people just walking through the trails around here because it's a beautiful piece of property and there's beautiful trails. I think I've had some really pleasant interactions where somebody's kind of just like, well, what does that thing do? And you explain to them what you're doing, and they're like, oh, okay, cool. And it seems sometimes a little bit like they're onlookers or like peeking at you, but it's because they have that foundational curiosity that we all share as scientists. And so I kind of think, I'm trying to think of tools and ways to get there, but how we could share with just people around us more, really open up their eyes to the vast array of things, but also just keep them curious, you know?
Yeah, that's great. So like our very immediate community, the people that run into us in the fields, happens all the time. Excellent. And Eva, take us away.
So I kind of struggled having a concrete answer for this question, because I feel like it's important for everyone. How do you choose who you want to communicate to? But I know this doesn't work for every piece of research, but I think it's really vital to communicate with the communities who, if you're doing research on land, communities whose own land will be implicated by the outcomes of your research. And I think if you're able to do that, start thinking about that from the beginning, not just at the end when you have results. That's really, really important. And because I think it will also shape, if you're able to make those connections with people that it might implicate ahead of time, then you can potentially mitigate some like unintentional, I don't know, missteps that, or misconnections that might happen later on had you learned who this actually related to too late. And so I really think this relates through a lot of ecology research, but yeah, for me, it's more direct because I'm thinking about like landscape design. So that relates directly to Indigenous people wherever you are in the world, there's someone Indigenous to that space. But I was also thinking about how it's really vital to not just, like I know limited time, limited resources, you can't do everything, but it's really great to not just find, when you do make that connection with a community who's implicated by your research, to not just choose like the one champion of that community and have that one kind of one-way connection point and feel like one and done, but actually to find whatever social medium that community has where you can share and have that presence known, because I don't think one person is necessarily representative of a whole community, though of course it's better than not reaching out at all. And then lastly, I was also, a first instinct answer to this question was like young people, because there's so much of a foundational moral guide that you can instill in young people through having that scientific background. But then I was thinking, oh, it's equally important to share this with older people, because who really shares knowledge with the youngest members of our family, but parents and grandparents and those who are mentors. So that's just another way to say, how do you choose? Just everyone should know.
Everyone, everywhere.
Everywhere.
Great answers, everyone. So this is our follow-up question that really kind of digs into the heels of like, okay, so you guys have said, community members, students, general population, young people, people who are implicated in that research, the people that we run into in those places where we're doing research, and taxpayer money. Like, so we have really big, broad communities that we're trying to reach with our science. And that's a big challenge, I think, because there's so many different barriers to reaching those communities. So let's brainstorm, like, what are tools, resources, strategies we could implement or leverage to build better science communication relationships with these audiences in the context of our role as a research community at UMBS. So this is really kind of, diving into the meat of that. And I'm going to start this question off with Lisa.
Okay, this is a very weird thought, but it just popped into my mind thinking about tools, right? So I was thinking social media is one that sort of comes to mind immediately. And then I thought about the QR code, right? Which is something I'm still like getting used to using. But so the weird thought that popped into my head was like, why don't I print a t-shirt with a QR code that will take people to my personal website? That would be too weird. But getting more comfortable and dexterous with incorporating like immediate access to information that is well designed. And this is where I feel like the design community has a lot to teach the scientific community. We have a lot to learn and listen to about how to present information in a way that's not intimidating, that is enjoyable to consume, that conveys a lot of information quickly and meaningfully. So think about like New York Times infographics, right? That's kind of the ideal or the goal, where it would be really great to get to that level of dexterity with information communication through graphic means. But yeah, I think just like having a personal website with up-to-date information and sort of easily digested graphics and information about what you're doing would be a goal I would set for myself. I don't know. And I think graduate students, maybe at that level, that's something that we can strive to produce for ourselves as we're looking for jobs. But something that older, more advanced researchers, people further along in their career could look to do too. And a skill that I'm hoping is being taught to, or just learned by, picked up on by younger students as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I feel like I'm imagining somebody walking through the station property and they see all these like flags and like research area, beware. And that's really all it says. Or you could have a little QR code and they can have like a little cool infographics of like, here are some cool results that we're finding and this is what we're studying, and like a little, mostly pictures, mostly, you know, plain language type things that interested passerby could enjoy. That's really awesome. Great, cool. Yeah, let's move on to Eva. What are tools and resources?
So I have this question made me think of like my dream piece of literature, which would be a book that took like some scientific knowledge, whatever it may be, and then it had a translation of it in different worldviews, not just in language. Like, let's say this is all in English, but I just think it's so important that we realize that Westernized science, that this is one language that we have to communicate knowledge. And I just think we all could benefit from seeing an example of like, what does a piece of knowledge look like through different cultures? And like, what does knowledge look like when it's told through a culture that has traditionally oral traditions? And it would be really different, and just a way to like help us all realize that this is just one way. Like English itself and many of the Germanic languages, I think are we a Romance language? Well, I think both Germanic and Romance, maybe they're the same. The point is that a lot of these languages from Europe are really noun-based languages. And so we think and we talk about a lot of things in our world as inanimate, and that they're things, right? But if we look at Anishinaabemowin and the language of Anishinaabe people, that the way of thinking is so different, and it becomes verb-based. So that's how it ties back to looking at relationships between different beings and thinking of things as beings and relatives, because there's so much activity in just the way that people talk. And so maybe that's like a little window into how you can start to see that, oh, wow, yeah, science, Western science is just one way to look at facts or knowledge or understandings of how the world works. So I would just really love if someone were to make a book that just had the same knowledge in different cultural ways of explaining it. That would be groundbreaking, I think.
Yeah, it would. That's wow, I had never even thought about that. Yeah, that's such a cool idea. Well, maybe that can be I don't know, your PhD. I mean, your career. That sounds more like a career. Yeah, that's awesome. All right, Laura, give us some resources.
First of all, I just want to say last two answers, incredible. I have to tell Lisa though, I have heard people talking about getting a QR code tattoo of like their website and things like that. This is just like really like, you know, messing around, but you know, if you're really that dedicated to your science, you could just get it on you forever. But I also kind of got the gears turning from what Lisa and Ava, you were both talking about. I think it could be really fun to almost challenge the UMBS scientific community to like create an infographic, create, you know, something like what Eva was saying, where it's a different, like our science through a different cultural worldview. Really letting the responsibility of this communication fall to one person to like keep making infographics for a bunch of different research, but like not in a contest kind of way, but in a way of like, oh, hey, like we have a schedule of, could you get an infographic about your research to post on our Facebook page, to post on our social media, to even, you know, attach to a QR code and put Lakeside somewhere. Because I think, yeah, this like combination of technology accessible, but also just like aesthetically readable, pleasing, edible information is one way that UMBS could really help each other understand our own peer science, but make it more accessible to the communities we were talking about. I feel like I had something else there, but I can't get it anymore. So I'll stop there and let.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I think that it kind of like got me thinking like, okay, so we have a lot of scientists, researchers in this community. And I feel like every time that gets brought up, I hear a lot of like, well, I'm not creative and I don't know how to use Photoshop, or, excuses like that. And so I'm wondering, like, can we leverage, the many, many, many people that do think in that way, that are creative, and kind of, leverage each other's skills, so we're not trying to do something that we don't think will be meaningful because we don't have the skill set. So I guess like it could look different depending on what skills you bring to that table. But yeah, no, I think that's a great idea, Laura. I just keep thinking of a picture of a loon. That's all I got right now. All right, and Hanna, you want to take us away?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so I'm thinking to disseminate all this research information, all the science that we're doing to a broader audience. Lisa briefly mentioned social media is huge, and trying to adapt to platforms that people are comfortable with, maybe young people, Twitter and TikTok, older people, Facebook, professionals, LinkedIn. I mean, just really being diverse about the social media that we are presenting on and the way that we're presenting it, which I think really ties in well with the infographics and what we're doing in the field. And I mean, I really feel like there's ways that people in different states can see the research that we're doing on social media and not only understand what we're doing, but feel like they're a part of it, feel like they could be there, feel like that could be them. And I feel like social media is a really great way to build that connection.
Yeah, I think that at this point, it is so impactful in people's lives. It's like, it's where people get a lot of information, for better or for worse. And, we use it, so it takes up a lot of our brain power. I mean, maybe if you don't use it, but it can. And I think that it can never go oversaid how important diversifying, like you said, Hanna, our social media platforms and updating them. Yeah, like TikTok. I feel like I'm even too old for TikTok. Not really, but like that's, you got to keep evolving to meeting the needs, especially since a lot of you mentioned students and young people are the audiences to reach. We really need to be thinking about that. Awesome. Yeah, really awesome answers to those kind of questions that are specific to our work. And in this final question, I really want to kind of take us big and out and think about this whole thing from a little different perspective. So the question is, in our current climate of mistrust and politicization of science, especially when it comes to issues of public health, environmental justice, the climate crisis, COVID, how do you think UMBS as a science community can best advocate for the importance of science in general as an essential to a functioning society? So just kind of big picture thinking about science advocacy in the world that we are in right now, and what can we do? So Eva, do you want to take a stab at this?
Sure. I think, so GLACE, which is Great Lakes Arts, Cultures, and Environments, a newer class at the biostation. I think that's a great example of more classes I would love to see at the biostation, because I think the best way that we can advocate for the importance of science at UMBS, but also just in the wider world, is to help people connect back to the place where they live or the place where they're from. And I think in doing that, a lot of what I see as resistance to science is when people are really disconnected from that sense of place, and not just a sense of place, but also really disconnected from the idea that they are part of nature. And that even means when people think like, oh, people are, nothing people do is good, we are evil, the world would be better off without us as far as the environment goes. I think that is even a red flag where it's like, oh, that person has really lost their connection to a sense of place and forgotten that people actually do have a place in the world, in the natural world, and have the capacity, history tells us we have the capacity to be really positive beings that play a role, enhance diversity, do all these good things. And I think the way that we start to remind ourselves that is by sharing stories of these places that we inhabit. And I think the easiest way to do that, I'm so biased, but I think the easiest way to do that is to get to know the plants of that place, but also get to know the people history of your place as well. And once you kind of put these in the tone of a story, rather than just facts, but actually telling a story, looking at the history, you inherently are connecting yourself back to science, whether you know it or not. And so that, which connects me back to GLACE, because again, a strong bias, I was the TA for this class, but I was so inspired by it because this class did exactly that. It bridges science and like place knowing, and really puts that context into the biostation, Northern Michigan, but also can be a tool that can be used or a way of thinking that you can take any place where you are.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Oh, sense of place. I love that. Great. Okay, Laura.
Cool. So I think my approach to this kind of the politicization and mistrust of science is get people talking so that you can listen where that mistrust is rooted in. That's a good suggestion, that it's like a disconnection from space and place. I think that is very true for a lot of people. But I think, you know, I'm still very young and I'm still very early in my career, but in the past I have been tempted to maybe share the science before I even know if somebody's interested. And so I think when it comes down to it, yeah, I guess just really trying to engage and find that connection, because it's easier to get through to somebody when it feels more conversational than it feels like, again, like kind of that talking head thing and isolated stuff I keep coming back to, where science has also been like dehumanized, and there's science, there's me, there's the environment, like all these things are really separate. And being able to really like listen to how a person's worldview is currently and try to maybe challenge it or even shift it just to address more interconnectedness, I think that's my approach currently. I'm sure it'll change in the future, and it has changed in the past.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Laura. And let's take it over to Hanna.
I feel like people may not trust the science just because it's not being presented to them in an accessible way. It's not being presented to them in a way that they can digest. And I mean, we can give them all these numbers that we collected. We can tell them, you know, the sea levels rising, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, all this. But if they don't, like you were saying, making a connection, if they can't make a connection to what does that mean for them in a not overly negative way, because that's just unhelpful for everyone, but in a way that it's like, this is what's happening, this is why it's happening, this is what's going to happen in the future, here's what you can do, and just being really open with them. And like you were saying, a discussion is so important, and just being present for them, really. I mean, like you said, people think of scientists as like separate from society, and oftentimes I've seen in academia, scientists think of themselves as separate from society, and they're not. And they need, like, science needs to be more accessible to the layperson, like you were saying with the just the summary that is written in a way that everyone can understand. What's the point in doing your science if you can't communicate it with the world, if they can't understand what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, great perspective. Thank you. All right, Lisa, you want to close us out?
Oh man, such good answers. So we've got a disconnection, right? And rebuilding a sense of being connected and belonging in a community. From Eva, that was my takeaway. From Laura, this idea of listening, right? People don't want to be talked to, they want to be talked with and to be understood. I think the sense of being misunderstood, and especially of being misunderstood in a negative way, judged, is something that is really plaguing our society right now. And then Hannah's point about transparency, honesty, and open access, I think are hugely important, all of those things. So I guess just to bring it all together, I would say yes to everything you all just said. I think that we have to find a way to tell the truth in a way that's not overwhelming, in a way that gives people a sense of hopefulness and ability to do something about important issues, ability to find root in them because they matter. So translating our science in a way that relates to real people and their real lives and their real families and livelihoods and so forth, but also, yeah, that makes them feel like they're able to access. And again, I would just, to put a exclamation point after what Hanna said, I think the more that we can point to where our data are, they are available. If you go look here, right, you can see how I did all of this. It will probably take some advanced training to understand how to use all of it, but it's not this black box. It's not an ivory tower. No one over here thinks that they're superior to you based on some perception of level of understanding. We're really in this together. We're really trying to get big, important problems solved for all of us together. And we all matter. That would, bringing it together, I guess.
Wow. Thanks, Lisa, for that summary and synthesis. That was really on point. And we are kind of over time, so we are not going to take any questions from the audience, but I do want to invite Jenny to come back and to close us out. But I just wanted to say thank you all so much for this amazing discussion. So insightful, so many great ideas. And I really just want to thank you for your time. I know many of you are busy in the field during the summer, but thank you so much. This was really, really, really great.
I totally agree, Kayla. I couldn't have said it better. I knew that these 4 scientists were greatly inspiring and brilliant, but I'm leaving this conversation genuinely revitalized and inspired, and I'm looking forward to taking some of these ideas forward myself in my role as a communicator. So with that, I'll wrap up this evening's conversation. Unfortunately for me, I could listen to them talk all night. But thank you so very much to our wonderful panelists. Thank you to Kayla for doing such a graceful job moderating this discussion. And my final pitch is please join us on August 10th. Dr. Newt Nadelhofer will be giving our Bennett Endowed Lecture in Plant and Fungal Ecology. So we hope that you join us for that. And I will close it out and take care, everybody. Have a good night, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.